You're giving broke energy, Margaret. It's honestly embarrassing. Those words sliced through the air at my grandson's birthday party like a blade through silk. My daughter-in-law Sophia stood there in her designer heels, looking down at me with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. I was holding a homemade birthday card I'd crafted for little Tommy, complete with hand-drawn dinosaurs and glitter that had taken me hours to apply. Apparently that wasn't good enough for the woman who'd married my son. The entire backyard went silent. 20 guests turned to stare at this 68-year-old woman being publicly humiliated by someone young enough to be her daughter. My son Marcus just stood there, champagne flute in hand, and said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Margaret Chen, and until that moment, I thought I understood my place in this family. I was the doting grandmother, the reliable babysitter, the woman who showed up with homemade cookies and unconditional love. I was the mother who had sacrificed everything to give Marcus the best life possible after his father died when he was 12. I thought those sacrifices meant something. I thought they had earned me basic respect. I was spectacularly wrong. The party was being held at Marcus and Sophia's new house in the hills, a sprawling monument to success that cost more than most people see in a lifetime. Everything was perfect, from the professionally coordinated decorations to the hired entertainment. Even Tommy's birthday cake was a work of art, 3 tiers of fondant perfection that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I felt out of place from the moment I arrived, but I'd convinced myself that didn't matter. This was about Tommy, my precious grandson, turning 5. I'd spent weeks making his card, carefully drawing each dinosaur because I knew he was obsessed with them. I'd written a little story inside about a brave little boy who went on adventures with his dinosaur friends. It came from my heart, from decades of watching him grow, of knowing exactly what made his eyes light up. But when I handed it to him, Sophia intercepted it like it was contaminated. She held it between 2 manicured fingers, examining it with the kind of expression someone might wear while inspecting spoiled milk. The silence stretched on as other guests began to notice the tension. Finally, she spoke those words that would change everything between us forever. You're giving broke energy, Margaret. It's honestly embarrassing. Broke energy. As if my love, my time, my effort could be reduced to an economic status. As if the value of a gift was measured solely by its price tag, rather than the heart behind it. I stood there, my cheeks burning with shame, while this woman who had never worked a day in her life dismissed decades of devotion with a single cruel phrase. The other guests began to shift uncomfortably. These were Sophia's friends mostly, other young professionals with their expensive clothes and casual cruelty. They lived in a world where everything had a price, where worth was measured in brands and bank balances. I didn't belong here, and Sophia wanted to make sure everyone knew it. What hurt most wasn't the public humiliation, though that was bad enough. It was watching my son, the boy I'd raised with every ounce of strength I had, stand there and let it happen. Marcus had been my world after his father died. I'd worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, to make sure he never felt the lack of a father figure in his achievements. I'd been at every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. I'd cheered louder than anyone when he graduated from law school, when he got his first big job, when he bought his first house. Now he stood there in his designer suit, surrounded by his wife's luxury, and couldn't find the spine to defend the woman who had given him everything, the woman who had loved him unconditionally through every phase of his life, every mistake, every triumph. His silence was louder than any words Sophia could have spoken. I mumbled some excuse about needing to use the restroom and fled inside their pristine house. Everything was white and chrome and cold, like a magazine spread rather than a home where a child lived. There were no family photos on display, no evidence of the grandmother who babysat Tommy twice a week, who had changed his diapers and sung him lullabies and taught him to read. It was as if my existence in their lives had been carefully edited out. I locked myself in their guest bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a woman who had aged beyond her years, worn down by decades of working and worrying and sacrificing. My hair was gray because I couldn't afford regular salon visits. My dress was from a department store clearance rack because I lived on a fixed income. But I had never thought of myself as giving broke energy. I had thought of myself as giving love. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the first time Sophia had made comments about my financial situation. Over the past 3 years, since she'd married Marcus, there had been a steady stream of little digs, small humiliations designed to put me in my place. The time she'd suggested I shouldn't come to their housewarming party because I couldn't afford a proper gift. The way she'd winced when I offered to cook Sunday dinner because my kitchen wasn't up to her standards. The constant references to how much things cost, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. I had ignored it all because I wanted to be part of my son's life, part of my grandson's world. I had swallowed my pride and accepted her casual cruelty, because the alternative was being cut off from the people I loved most. But standing in that bathroom, looking at my own defeated reflection, I realized that I hadn't been preserving relationships. I had been enabling abuse. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, the party was winding down. Parents were collecting their children, and the hired staff was beginning to clean up. I found Tommy playing alone in a corner, with some toy dinosaurs, temporarily forgotten in the social chaos of his own birthday party. My heart broke a little more seeing him there, this beautiful child who deserved so much better than parents who were more concerned with appearances than with actual parenting. I knelt down beside him, my knees creaking in protest. Tommy looked up at me with those bright eyes that reminded me so much of Marcus at that age, before life had hardened him into someone I barely recognized. "Grandma Maggie," he said, using the nickname he'd given me when he first learned to talk. "Did you see my dinosaur cake? It's really big, but I liked your card better. It has a story in it." I hugged him then, probably tighter than I should have, breathing in that sweet child smell of innocence and joy. At least someone appreciated my efforts. At least someone still saw value in love over luxury. Sophia appeared beside us like a shadow, her smile sharp as glass. "Tommy, darling, it's time to say goodbye to Grandma Margaret. She needs to get home now." There was a finality in her tone that went beyond the end of a party. It felt like a dismissal, a banishment. I kissed Tommy's forehead and promised to see him soon, though I wondered if that would actually be true. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, not one person thanked me for coming. Not one person acknowledged my presence or my gift or my relationship to the birthday boy. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage and soul-deep exhaustion. I lived in a small apartment across town, a modest place that I had moved to after selling the family house to help fund Marcus's law school education. It was clean and comfortable, filled with memories and photographs that chronicled a life of love and sacrifice. But after the grandeur of Marcus and Sophia's mansion, it felt shabby and small. I sat in my living room, surrounded by photos of Marcus growing up, images that told,
"Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story."
The story of our life together. There he was at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a crayon drawing he'd made for me. There he was at graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and possibility. When had that bright, loving boy turned into a man who could stand by and watch his mother be humiliated? Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the party, every cruel word, every silent betrayal. But somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, something shifted inside me. The hurt began to crystallize into something harder, cleaner. Anger. Not the hot, destructive kind, but the cold, calculating kind that demanded action. For too long I had allowed myself to be treated as less than human by people who owed their very existence to my sacrifices. For too long I had accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. For too long I had confused enabling with nurturing, submission with devotion. As the sun rose on what would be the first day of my new life, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the family doormat. I was done accepting disrespect in exchange for access to my grandson. I was done pretending that my feelings didn't matter as long as everyone else was comfortable. It was time to show them exactly what broke really looked like. The following Monday, I made an appointment with Harold Fitzgerald, the estate attorney who had helped me organize my affairs after moving to the apartment. Harold was a kind man in his 70s, old school in the best way, someone who understood the value of dignity and respect. His office was lined with leather-bound law books and filled with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. "Margaret," he said, rising from his desk as I entered. "How nice to see you again. How can I help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my will," I said, settling into the comfortable chair across from his desk. "Significant changes." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "Of course. May I ask what's prompting these changes?" I told him about the party, about Sophia's words, about Marcus's silence. I told him about 3 years of accumulated slights and deliberate humiliations. I told him about a grandson I adored, but couldn't protect from parents who valued appearance over substance. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, his experienced eyes taking in not just my words but the pain behind them. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and regarded me with something that looked like admiration. "Margaret, in 40 years of practice, I've seen a lot of family situations. I've watched good people destroy themselves, trying to maintain relationships with people who don't respect them. What you're describing sounds like financial and emotional abuse, even if it's subtle." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders at having my experience validated by someone who understood these dynamics. It wasn't just me being overly sensitive. It wasn't just a misunderstanding or a personality clash. It was abuse, pure and simple. "What did you have in mind?" Harold asked, pulling out a legal pad. "I want to change my primary beneficiary," I said. "Everything I had planned to leave to Marcus, I want to redirect to a scholarship fund for underprivileged children. The apartment, my savings, my life insurance policy, everything." Harold made notes as I spoke. "And your current will leaves everything to Marcus?" "Yes, with the understanding that he would use part of it to ensure Tommy's education and future. But I don't trust that anymore. I don't trust that any of my legacy would actually benefit my grandson rather than just funding more luxury for them." "What about Tommy directly?" Harold asked. "You could set up a trust fund that bypasses his parents entirely, something that would kick in when he reaches 18 or graduates from college." I considered this for a moment. It was tempting, but I realized I wanted to make a different kind of statement. I want to leave Tommy something personal, something meaningful but not financial. Maybe some photographs, some family heirlooms. But the bulk of my estate should go toward helping children who actually need it, not adding to the wealth of people who already have more than they know what to do with. Harold nodded approvingly. "It's your money, Margaret. You earned it, you saved it, and you have every right to leave it to whomever you choose. No one is entitled to an inheritance, not even family." As we worked through the details of the new will, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power, control over my own life and legacy. For decades, I had been reactive, responding to other people's needs and demands. Now, for the first time, I was being proactive, making decisions based on my own values, rather than my desperate need to maintain family connections. The scholarship fund would be established through the local community college, providing financial assistance to first-generation college students from low-income families. Students like Marcus had been, before success had made him forget where he came from. Students who understood the value of education and opportunity because they had never taken either for granted. Harold walked me through all the legal requirements, the paperwork that would need to be filed, the timeline for implementation. It would take a few weeks to make everything official, but once it was done, my new will would be ironclad. No one would be able to contest it or claim they had been unfairly excluded. As I left Harold's office that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't being vindictive or cruel. I was being honest about the reality of my relationships and making decisions accordingly. If Sophia thought I was giving broke energy, wait until she discovered what broke reality actually looked like. The next few weeks passed quietly. I continued my regular routine, babysitting Tommy twice a week while Sophia went to her yoga classes and spa appointments. She treated me with the same casual dismissiveness she always had, clearly assuming that the birthday party incident had been forgotten. Marcus remained distant and distracted, absorbed in his work and his wife's social calendar. During those babysitting sessions, I paid closer attention to Tommy's world. I noticed that despite living in a house filled with expensive toys, he was often lonely. His parents were frequently absent, even when they were physically present. They hired other people to handle most of his actual care, while they maintained their social obligations and professional appearances. Tommy would cling to me when I arrived and beg me not to leave when Sophia returned. He would save up stories from his week to tell me, as if I were the only person who actually listened to him. He would show me his artwork from school, his attempts at writing his name, his latest dinosaur facts. I realized that I wasn't just his grandmother. I was his primary source of unconditional love and attention. This made my decision both harder and easier. Harder because I knew that changing my will might eventually impact my access to Tommy. Easier because I could see that he was already suffering from his parents' values and priorities. Maybe my actions would force them to examine their behavior. Maybe it would make them realize what they stood to lose. 3 weeks after my meeting with Harold, the new will was complete and filed. I had a copy in my safe deposit box and another in Harold's office files. There was no going back now, and I felt surprisingly peaceful about that fact. I had taken control of my own narrative instead of letting other people write it for me. That weekend, Sophia called with an unusual request. She wanted me to babysit Tommy overnight while she and Marcus attended some charity gala. It was short notice, and normally she would have hired one of her expensive babysitters rather than rely on free grandma labor. But apparently even their backup plans had fallen through, and she was desperate. I agreed, of course. Any chance to spend extended time with Tommy was a gift, even if it came from his mother's convenience, rather than her generosity. I packed an overnight bag and drove to their house, where Sophia met me at the door in a floor-length gown that probably cost more than my car. She rattled off a list of instructions about Tommy's bedtime routine, his breakfast preferences, and emergency contacts. Then she handed me a typed schedule that outlined every minute of the evening, as if I hadn't been caring for children since before she was born. Marcus appeared behind her in his tuxedo, looking handsome and successful, and completely disconnected from his own family. They left without saying goodbye to Tommy, who was playing in his room, unaware that his parents were abandoning him for another social obligation. I found him building an elaborate dinosaur world with his toys, completely absorbed in his imagination. "Grandma Maggie," he squealed when he saw me, "are you staying over? Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" "We can have whatever you want for breakfast," I promised, settling down on the floor beside him. "Tell me about these dinosaurs. What kind of adventure are they having?" He launched into an elaborate story about brave dinosaurs protecting their families from danger, and I listened with the kind of attention his parents never seemed to have time for. We played until bedtime, then I read him 3 stories and sang him the same lullabies I had sung to Marcus decades earlier. After Tommy was asleep, I found myself alone in their magnificent house, surrounded by luxury that felt cold and hollow. I wandered through rooms that looked like showpieces rather than living spaces. There were no family photos anywhere, no evidence of the messy, joyful chaos of actual family life. Everything was perfect and sterile and sad. In Marcus's home office, I found myself staring at his law degree hanging on the wall. I remembered the day he graduated, how proud I had been, how bright his future had seemed. I had sacrificed so much to make that moment possible, selling the family home, working extra jobs, going without basics so he could have opportunities I had never dreamed of. Now he used that education to maintain a lifestyle that excluded the woman who had made it all possible. He had learned to see success as separation rather than connection, achievement as escape rather than responsibility. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that his accomplishments were built on his mother's sacrifices. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my pride, accepted disrespect, and enabled their bad behavior because I was afraid of losing my place in their lives. I thought about all the ways I had diminished myself to make them comfortable, all the times I had apologized for existing in a way that didn't match their vision of success. But mostly I thought about Tommy sleeping peacefully upstairs, a beautiful child growing up in a house where love was conditional and worth was measured in dollars. He deserved better than parents who saw grandparents as free babysitting services and inheritance as an entitlement. He deserved to understand that real wealth came from relationships, from kindness, from treating people with dignity regardless of their economic status. When Marcus and Sophia returned home the next morning, they were hungover and irritable. They barely thanked me for my overnight service, and Sophia made several pointed comments about how I had rearranged things in their kitchen while making Tommy's breakfast. Even my help was apparently inadequate, requiring criticism and correction. As I prepared to leave, Tommy wrapped his small arms around my legs and begged me to stay longer. The contrast between his genuine affection and his parents' casual dismissal was stark and heartbreaking. I hugged him tight and promised to see him again soon, though I wondered what that would look like once they discovered my new will. Driving home that morning, I felt a sense of completion settling over me. I had spent one last night in their world, had seen one more time how they lived and loved and prioritized. I had confirmed that my decision was the right one, that changing my will wasn't about revenge, but about honesty, about refusing to pretend that money could buy what they had never been willing to give freely. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in my kitchen making soup when my phone rang, and I saw Marcus's name on the display. We hadn't spoken since the babysitting weekend several weeks earlier, and he rarely called unless he needed something. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," his voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to talk. Now." I kept stirring my soup, my voice calm and steady. "About what, Marcus? Don't play games with me. Harold Fitzgerald called me today. He said you changed your will. He said I need to understand that there have been some significant modifications to your estate planning." The betrayal in his voice was almost laughable. He was angry that I had made decisions about my own money without consulting him first, as if my life savings existed solely for his future benefit, as if I owed him an explanation for every financial choice I made. "Harold shouldn't have called you," I said. "That was indiscreet of him." "Mom, what have you done?" His voice cracked slightly, and I could hear Sophia in the background demanding to know what was happening. "You can't just cut me out of your will. I'm your son. I'm your only heir." "Actually, I can do exactly that," I replied, still stirring my soup with methodical precision. "It's my money, Marcus. I earned it, I saved it, and I can leave it to whomever I choose." "But why?" The question came out as almost a wail, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knees. "Why would you do this to me? To us? To Tommy?" "Because," I said, setting down my spoon and giving him my full attention for the first time in the conversation, "your wife thinks I give broke energy. I thought I'd show her what broke really looks like." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on for so long that I wondered if he had hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow with shock. "This is about Sophia's comment at Tommy's party? You're destroying our future over something she said when she was stressed?" I laughed then, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. "Something she said when she was stressed? Marcus, your wife publicly humiliated me at your son's birthday party, and you stood there and said nothing. That wasn't stress talking. That was her showing me exactly what she thinks of me, and you showing me exactly how much my dignity matters to you. Mom, please. Sophia didn't mean anything by it. She just speaks her mind sometimes. You know how she is." "Yes," I said. "I know exactly how she is. And I know exactly how you are when she treats me like garbage, and you stand by and watch it happen. So I made a decision based on that knowledge." "What decision?" His voice was getting higher, more desperate. "What exactly did you do?" "I established a scholarship fund for underprivileged children," I said matter-of-factly. "Kids who understand the value of education and opportunity, because they've never taken either for granted. Kids who know how to be grateful for help instead of feeling entitled to it." "A scholarship fund," he repeated slowly, as if the words were in a foreign language. "You gave away my inheritance to strangers?" "I gave away my money to people who will appreciate it," I corrected. "Your inheritance was never guaranteed, Marcus. It was a gift I was planning to give based on the assumption that you loved and respected me. That assumption turned out to be incorrect." I could hear Sophia yelling in the background now, demanding that Marcus put the phone on speaker so she could participate in this conversation. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had started this whole situation with her cruel comment now wanted to be included in the discussion about its consequences. "We're coming over," Marcus said abruptly. "We need to discuss this in person. You can't make a decision this important when you're emotional and upset." "I'm not emotional," I said calmly. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, and you're not welcome in my home until you can learn to treat me with basic respect." "Mom, don't do this. Don't throw away our relationship over money." "I didn't throw away our relationship, Marcus. I just stopped pretending we had one. And it's not about money. It's about dignity. It's about treating people with kindness regardless of their bank balance. It's about remembering where you came from and who helped you get where you are." I hung up before he could respond and turned off my phone entirely. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them experience a tiny fraction of the helplessness I had felt standing in their backyard while being publicly humiliated by the woman my son had chosen over his own mother. The next few days brought a parade of desperate attempts at contact. Marcus called repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Sophia sent text messages that ranged from fake apologies to thinly veiled threats. They even sent flowers with a card that read, "We're sorry for any misunderstanding. Please call us so we can work this out." I threw the flowers in the garbage and deleted the voicemails without listening to them. There was nothing they could say that would change my mind, and I wasn't interested in giving them another opportunity to manipulate me with false remorse and empty promises. The breakthrough came when they showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. I watched through my window as they stood in the hallway outside my door, Marcus pounding and calling my name while Sophia paced behind him like a caged animal. They looked desperate and disheveled, nothing like the polished couple who had dismissed me so casually just weeks earlier. I let them stand there for 20 minutes before I finally opened the door. They both started talking at once, their words tumbling over each other in their eagerness to fix what they had broken. But I held up my hand for silence, and something in my expression made them stop mid-sentence. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "Make them count." Marcus stepped forward, his face a mask of contrition that might have been convincing if I hadn't seen it so many times before. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have defended you at the party. I should have stood up to Sophia when she said those things. I was wrong, and I'm asking for your forgiveness." Sophia nodded eagerly behind him, her designer mask of superiority replaced with something that looked almost like fear. "Margaret, I was completely out of line. I was stressed about the party being perfect, and I took it out on you. It was inexcusable, and I'm truly sorry." They were saying all the right words, hitting all the emotional notes they thought would work on me. The problem was that I no longer believed them. Too many years of broken promises and repeated disrespect had used up all my faith in their capacity for genuine change. "Thank you for the apology," I said calmly. "I accept it. But that doesn't change my decision about my will." The relief on their faces turned to panic as they realized that their standard manipulation tactics weren't working. Sophia stepped forward, her voice taking on a wheedling tone that I suppose had worked on other people in her life. "Margaret, please be reasonable. Marcus is your only child. Tommy is your only grandchild. Surely family means more than some strangers you'll never meet. Family means treating each other with love and respect," I replied. "It means standing up for each other when others attack. It means valuing people for who they are, rather than what they can provide. When you can show me that kind of family loyalty, we can discuss my estate planning." Marcus was getting desperate now, his lawyer training kicking in, as he tried to find an angle that would work in his favor. "Mom, think about Tommy. Think about his future, his education, his opportunities. You're punishing him for our mistakes." "Tommy will be fine," I said firmly. "His parents have plenty of money to provide for his education and opportunities. What he needs more than my money is parents who model kindness and gratitude instead of entitlement and cruelty." "But what about our relationship?" Sophia asked, tears starting to form in her carefully made-up eyes. "What about the chance to repair the damage and move forward as a family?" I looked at her for a long moment, this beautiful young woman who had never learned that words have consequences, that actions create reactions, that respect is earned rather than demanded. "Our relationship ended the moment you decided I was an embarrassment to be endured rather than a person to be valued," I said quietly. "The moment you reduced my love to broke energy, and my son decided that was acceptable. You can't repair something that was never built on solid ground to begin with." Their 5 minutes were up, and I could see in their faces that they knew it. The desperate energy was starting to turn to anger as they realized that their usual tactics weren't going to work this time, that I wasn't going to be bullied or manipulated or guilt-tripped into changing my mind. "You're going to regret this," Sophia said, her mask finally slipping completely. "You're going to die alone and forgotten, and your precious scholarship kids won't even remember your name." "Maybe," I said, unmoved by her venom, "but I'll die with my dignity intact, which is more than I can say for someone who thinks cruelty is acceptable, as long as it's expensive." They left without another word, their footsteps echoing angrily down the hallway. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family we could have been. Relief that I no longer had to pretend we were something we weren't. The months that followed were the most peaceful I had experienced in years. Without the constant stress of managing Marcus and Sophia's expectations and dealing with their casual cruelty, I found myself rediscovering who I was beyond my role as mother and grandmother. I started taking art classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I joined a book club and made friends with women who valued intelligence and kindness over net worth and social status. I began volunteering at the community college where my scholarship fund would be housed, working with first-generation college students who reminded me why education mattered and why opportunity should be cherished rather than taken for granted. These young people, many of them working multiple jobs while pursuing their degrees, showed more gratitude for small kindnesses than my own family had ever shown for major sacrifices. The legal challenges began in earnest about 6 months after I changed my will. Marcus hired an expensive attorney to contest the document, claiming I had been mentally incompetent when I made the changes. It was exactly the kind of vindictive response I had expected from someone who had learned to see obstacles as problems to be solved, rather than lessons to be learned. Harold represented me with the quiet competence that had made me trust him in the first place. The medical evaluations they demanded showed that I was perfectly sound of mind and body. The psychological assessments confirmed that I understood the consequences of my actions and had made my decisions based on rational considerations rather than emotional instability. The case dragged on for over a year, but it was ultimately unsuccessful. The will stood as written, my scholarship fund remained intact, and Marcus was forced to accept that his inheritance had been redirected to people who would actually appreciate it. The legal fees probably cost him more than he would have received anyway, which struck me as perfectly appropriate justice. During this time, I had limited contact with Tommy, which was the hardest part of my decision to maintain. Marcus and Sophia used access to my grandson as a weapon, allowing supervised visits only when it served their purposes and canceling them whenever they felt I needed to be punished for my choices. But even those brief visits confirmed that I had made the right decision. Tommy was growing up in an environment where love was conditional, where value was measured in material terms, where respect was something you purchased rather than earned. He was becoming a smaller version of his parents, learning their lessons about entitlement and superiority. On his 7th birthday, I sent him a card similar to the one that had started this whole situation. Hand-drawn dinosaurs, a personal story, glitter applied with love and patience. This time, I didn't attend the party. This time, I didn't subject myself to their casual cruelty. This time, I maintained my dignity instead of sacrificing it for access. I never heard whether Tommy received the card or what his reaction was, but I hoped that someday, when he was older and capable of understanding the difference between love and luxury, he would remember his grandmother, who had chosen principles over popularity, integrity over inheritance. The scholarship fund was formally established 2 years after that terrible birthday party, and the first recipients were selected from hundreds of deserving applicants. I attended the award ceremony and watched as young people who understood struggle received opportunities that would change their lives. Their gratitude was genuine and overwhelming, a stark contrast to the entitled expectations I had dealt with for so many years. Marcus and Sophia were notably absent from this event, though they had been invited. I hadn't expected them to come, but some small part of me had hoped they might want to see how their former inheritance was being used to create real change in real lives. Their absence spoke volumes about their priorities and values. As I watched those scholarship recipients accept their awards, I felt a sense of completion that I had never experienced during all my years of enabling and sacrificing for people who had taken my generosity for granted. This was what my money was meant for. This was the kind of legacy that actually mattered. I realized that in trying so hard to maintain relationships with people who didn't value me, I had almost lost touch with my own worth. I had confused love with submission, family loyalty with self-destruction. I had allowed other people's definitions of success to override my own understanding of what made life meaningful. Now at 70 years old, I was finally living according to my own values instead of desperately trying to earn approval from people who had never been capable of giving it freely. I was investing in futures that mattered, instead of funding lifestyles that celebrated selfishness. I was creating a legacy of opportunity rather than entitlement. The broke energy comment that had started this journey seemed almost laughable now. Sophia had been right in ways she couldn't have imagined. I had been giving energy to people who saw me as financially and socially inferior. But I had also been broke spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically from years of accepting treatment that diminished my worth as a human being. Now I was rich in ways that couldn't be measured in bank balances or designer labels. Rich in relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Rich in purpose that extended beyond my own immediate family. Rich in the knowledge that my life's work would continue to create positive change long after I was gone. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if Marcus and Sophia had learned anything from our estrangement. I wondered if they had examined their behavior and found it wanting. I wondered if they had developed any capacity for genuine remorse or personal growth, but mostly I didn't think about them at all anymore. They had become characters in a story I had finished writing, people from a chapter of my life that had taught me important lessons about boundaries and self-respect. I wished them well, hoped they would become better people for their son's sake, but I no longer felt responsible for their emotional or financial welfare. My story had become about something bigger than family drama or inheritance disputes. It had become about the power of choice, the importance of dignity, and the courage it takes to live according to your own values even when doing so costs you relationships you thought you couldn't live without. I learned that you can love someone and still refuse to accept their mistreatment. That family obligations work both ways, requiring respect as well as devotion. That money is a tool for creating the kind of world you want to live in, not a weapon for controlling people who disappoint you. The morning my grandson turned 8, I woke up to find a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Tommy's voice, shaky and barely above a whisper, speaking into what sounded like a phone hidden under blankets. "Grandma Maggie, I miss you. Mommy says you don't want to see me anymore, but I drew you a picture of dinosaurs. I hid it in my room because she said it was silly. Happy birthday to me, I guess." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces listening to that sweet child's voice, believing that I had abandoned him. 3 years had passed since I changed my will. 3 years since I had chosen dignity over access, and apparently Marcus and Sophia had spent that time rewriting our family history to make me the villain in their narrative. I sat in my kitchen with my morning coffee, staring at my phone and wrestling with emotions I thought I had resolved. The rational part of my mind knew that responding would open a door I had deliberately closed. It would give Marcus and Sophia another opportunity to manipulate me, to use Tommy as leverage to get what they wanted. But the grandmother part of my heart was breaking at the thought of this child believing he had been rejected by someone who loved him unconditionally. After an hour of internal debate, I made a decision that I knew might complicate my carefully constructed new life. I called Harold Fitzgerald and asked him to arrange a supervised visit with Tommy through the family court system. If Marcus and Sophia wanted to use our grandson as a weapon, then we would handle this through legal channels that protected everyone involved. Harold was initially reluctant, knowing how much peace I had found in my separation from their toxicity. But when I played him Tommy's voicemail, his professional demeanor softened into grandfatherly concern. "Margaret," he said quietly, "this isn't about money or wills or family drama anymore. This is about a child who's being used as a pawn in an adult conflict. We can petition for grandparent visitation rights based on your established relationship with Tommy prior to the estrangement." The legal process took months, during which I heard nothing directly from Marcus or Sophia, but their attorney made it clear that they viewed my petition as another attack on their autonomy, another attempt to insert myself into their lives where I wasn't wanted. They painted me as a vindictive old woman who was using the court system to harass them because I couldn't accept their boundaries. The irony was breathtaking. These people who had spent years treating me as their personal bank account and free childcare service were now claiming that I was the one overstepping boundaries. These people who had publicly humiliated me and then expected me to continue funding their lifestyle were portraying themselves as victims of my unreasonable demands. But the family court judge saw through their performance. During the hearing, she reviewed the documentation of my relationship with Tommy, including photos, videos, and testimony from neighbors who had witnessed our bond. She also reviewed the timeline of our estrangement, noting that it coincided directly with my decision to change my will, rather than any concerns about my fitness as a grandmother. Most damaging to their case was Tommy himself. At 8 years old, he was old enough to express his own feelings about seeing his grandmother, and when the court-appointed child advocate interviewed him, his responses revealed the emotional manipulation he had been subjected to. He told the advocate that he missed his grandma Maggie, but had been told she didn't want to see him anymore because he wasn't good enough. He said his parents had told him that I was angry at him for something he had done wrong, though he couldn't remember what that something was. He had internalized their rejection as his own failure, carrying guilt that belonged to the adults who should have been protecting him. The judge awarded me supervised visitation every other Saturday afternoon to take place at a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. It wasn't the warm, loving relationship I had once enjoyed with Tommy, but it was a start. It was recognition that my role in his life had value, that his well-being was enhanced by our connection rather than threatened by it. Our first supervised visit took place at a family resource center downtown, a cheerful space designed to facilitate healthy interactions between family members in complicated situations. Tommy arrived with Marcus, who avoided eye contact with me entirely while signing the necessary paperwork. The boy looked smaller than I remembered, more cautious, as if life had taught him to be careful about hope and affection. The supervisor, a kind woman named Linda, who had decades of experience with family conflicts, explained the ground rules and then settled into a chair with a book, giving us privacy while maintaining her required oversight. Tommy sat across from me at a small table, his hands folded in his lap, uncertain about how to behave in this strange new dynamic. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice catching slightly on the endearment I hadn't been able to use in so long. "How are you doing?" He looked up at me with those beautiful eyes that still reminded me so much of Marcus at that age, before life had hardened him into someone I barely recognized. "I'm okay," he said carefully. "Are you mad at me?" "Oh, honey, no." I reached across the table to touch his hand, relief flooding through me when he didn't pull away. "I could never be mad at you. I love you so much and I've missed you every single day. But Mommy said you didn't want to see me anymore because I was too much trouble." His voice was small and confused, revealing the depth of the emotional damage that had been inflicted on him by parents who should have protected him from adult conflicts. "That's not true," I said firmly, my anger at Marcus and Sophia crystallizing into something cold and hard. "You are never too much trouble. You are the light of my life, and nothing you could ever do would make me stop loving you or stop wanting to see you." We spent the rest of that first visit slowly rebuilding our connection. I had brought coloring books and colored pencils, remembering his love for artistic activities. As we worked together on pictures of dinosaurs and dragons, some of his natural enthusiasm began to return. He told me about school, about his friends, about a science project he was working on about prehistoric creatures. But beneath his chatter, I could sense the wariness that hadn't been there before. He had learned to guard his emotions, to be careful about expressing too much joy or affection. He had been taught that love was conditional, that relationships could disappear without warning or explanation. At 8 years old, he was already developing the emotional armor that would protect him from further abandonment. When our 2 hours were up, Tommy hugged me tightly, clinging for just a moment longer than necessary. "Can I see you again next week?" he asked, and the hope in his voice nearly broke my heart. "In 2 weeks, I promised. Every other Saturday, for as long as you want to see me." Marcus was waiting in the parking lot when we emerged from the building, his face a mask of barely controlled resentment. He clearly viewed these court-ordered visits as another humiliation, another way that I was intruding on the perfect life he had constructed without me. "How was it?" he asked Tommy, his tone suggesting that he hoped the answer would be disappointing. "It was good," Tommy said simply, but I could see him already beginning to shut down, to hide his enthusiasm in response to his father's disapproval. "Grandma Maggie drew dinosaurs with me." "That's nice," Marcus said dismissively, taking Tommy's hand with a possessiveness that felt aggressive. "Say goodbye to your grandmother." The formal distance in his words stung, but I didn't let it show. I kissed Tommy's forehead and told him I loved him, watching as Marcus led him away without a backward glance. The message was clear. These visits were happening because the court had forced them, not because I was genuinely welcome in their lives. Over the following months, our Saturday visits became the highlight of my weeks. Tommy gradually relaxed back into the loving, curious child I remembered, though traces of his newfound caution remained. We worked on art projects, played games, and talked about everything from dinosaurs to space exploration to his dreams for the future. During one visit, he confided that his parents were fighting more often now, their voices carrying through the walls of their perfect house in ways that made him feel scared and responsible. He had developed the hypervigilance common in children who live with chronic conflict, always monitoring the emotional temperature of his environment and adjusting his behavior accordingly. "Do they fight about me?" he asked one afternoon as we built a castle out of blocks. "Sometimes I hear my name when they're arguing." "Adults sometimes disagree about things that have nothing to do with you," I told him gently. "But I want you to know that you are not responsible for their feelings or their choices. You're just a kid, and your job is to be a kid. But what if I'm the reason they're unhappy?" The question revealed the burden he had been carrying, the weight of adult emotions that had been unfairly placed on his small shoulders. "Honey, listen to me carefully. You are not responsible for anyone's happiness except your own. When adults are unhappy, it's because of adult problems that have nothing to do with children. Your only job is to be yourself and to be loved for exactly who you are." These conversations broke my heart because they revealed how much emotional damage had been done to Tommy in the 3 years since our estrangement began. He had internalized the conflict between his parents and me, had been made to feel responsible for tensions he couldn't understand or control. He was developing anxiety and people-pleasing behaviors that would serve him poorly as he grew older. I began incorporating therapeutic activities into our visits, art therapy techniques I had learned through my volunteer work with at-risk children. Drawing and storytelling became ways for Tommy to express emotions he didn't have words for, to process experiences that were too complex for his developing mind to fully understand. Through his artwork, I saw the chaos of his inner world. Pictures of houses with dark clouds overhead, families separated by walls or vast distances, children standing alone in empty spaces. His stories often featured characters who were lost or abandoned, searching for their way back to safety and love. One particularly revealing drawing showed a small figure labeled me standing outside a large house, with bars on the windows and doors. Inside the house were 3 other figures, but they looked angry and scary rather than loving and protective. When I asked him about the picture, he said it was about feeling locked out and locked in at the same time. As our visits continued, I began to notice changes in Tommy's behavior that concerned me. He was becoming increasingly anxious about transitioning between our visits and going home. He would cling to me at the end of our time together, sometimes having what appeared to be panic attacks when he saw Marcus arrive to pick him up. During one particularly difficult goodbye, Tommy had a complete meltdown, sobbing and begging not to go home. Linda, our supervisor, had to physically comfort him, while I stood helplessly by, unable to provide the reassurance he needed, because I couldn't promise that everything would be okay. After that incident, Linda filed a report with the family court, expressing concern about Tommy's emotional state and recommending a more comprehensive evaluation of the family dynamics. She had observed enough of our interactions to understand that the child's distress wasn't about me, but about returning to an environment where he felt unsafe or unwanted. The court ordered family therapy for Marcus, Sophia, and Tommy, with recommendations that they address the child's anxiety and the underlying conflicts that were affecting his well-being. They also expanded my visitation rights, allowing for longer visits and occasional overnight stays, recognizing that my relationship with Tommy was beneficial rather than harmful to his development. Marcus and Sophia fought these recommendations vigorously, arguing that court intervention was unnecessary and that Tommy's emotional issues were being caused by my presence in his life rather than my absence. They hired child psychologists who testified that grandparent visitation in high-conflict situations could be traumatic for children. But Tommy's own words betrayed their narrative. In sessions with the court-appointed therapist, he consistently expressed love and longing for his grandmother, describing our visits as the safest and happiest parts of his week. He talked about feeling caught between loving me and loyalty to his parents, confused by their insistence that I was somehow dangerous or harmful. The therapist's report was damning in its assessment of Marcus and Sophia's parenting strategies. It documented emotional manipulation, parentification of the child, and the use of guilt and fear as discipline tools. It recommended individual therapy for Tommy to address his anxiety and trauma, as well as parenting classes for Marcus and Sophia to help them develop healthier communication patterns. Reading that report was both validating and heartbreaking. Validating because it confirmed what I had suspected about the emotional environment Tommy was living in. Heartbreaking because it revealed the extent of the damage that had been done to this innocent child by adults who should have protected him from their own dysfunction. The expanded visitation schedule allowed me to see Tommy more frequently and for longer periods, which helped stabilize his emotional state considerably. Our overnight visits became opportunities for him to experience unconditional love and acceptance, to remember what it felt like to be valued for himself, rather than as a pawn in adult conflicts. During one of these overnight stays, Tommy asked me a question that revealed how much he had been thinking about our family situation. "Grandma Maggie, why don't you live with us anymore? Did I do something wrong?" The directness of his question caught me off guard, and I realized that despite our months of visits, he still didn't understand the adult dynamics that had led to our separation. In his child's mind, families should naturally be together, and any deviation from that norm must be someone's fault. I sat down beside him on my couch, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes adults have disagreements that make it hard for them to live together or spend time together. But that doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong, especially not you. "But don't you miss Daddy? Don't you want us all to be together?" The longing in his voice broke my heart, because I could hear his desperate wish for a happy, unified family where everyone loved and respected each other. He was too young to understand that some relationships are too damaged to repair, that some conflicts run too deep for forgiveness to bridge. "I miss the Daddy I used to know," I told him honestly. "But people sometimes change in ways that make relationships difficult. The most important thing is that you are loved, not whether all the adults in your life get along with each other." These conversations helped Tommy begin to understand that our family situation wasn't his fault, but they also revealed his deep desire for reconciliation. He began asking if there was anything he could do to fix things between his parents and me, to make us all love each other again. I had to explain repeatedly that this wasn't his responsibility, that children couldn't and shouldn't try to solve adult problems. But I could see that he was already developing the peacekeeper role that many children in high-conflict families adopt, taking on emotional burdens that belonged to the adults around him. As Tommy's 9th birthday approached, I found myself facing a familiar dilemma. The court order gave me the right to attend significant events in his life, including birthday parties, but I knew that exercising that right would create tension and conflict that would ultimately hurt Tommy more than help him. I decided to celebrate his birthday separately, planning a special day that would be just for us without the complications of his parents' hostility. I rented a private room at the Children's Museum, invited some of his school friends whose parents I had met through our activities, and created a celebration focused entirely on his interests and happiness. The party was small but joyful, filled with the kind of authentic celebration that had been missing from his life for too long. Tommy's friends were delighted to meet his grandmother, and their parents were warm and welcoming once they understood our situation. It was the kind of family gathering I had always envisioned but had never been able to create within the toxic dynamics of Marcus and Sophia's world. During the party, one of the other mothers pulled me aside to tell me how much Tommy talked about me at school. She said he often mentioned our Saturday visits as the highlight of his week, and that his artwork at school frequently featured dinosaurs and other things we had worked on together. "It means a lot to him that you're fighting to stay in his life," she said. A lot of kids in his situation end up losing their grandparents entirely when families fall apart. You're giving him something stable to hold on to. Her words reminded me why I had chosen to pursue visitation rights despite the legal complications and emotional toll. This wasn't about my relationship with Marcus and Sophia anymore. This was about ensuring that Tommy had at least one adult in his life who loved him unconditionally, who would be there for him regardless of what happened between his parents. Later that evening, as Tommy and I cleaned up from the party, he looked at me with an expression that seemed far too serious for a 9-year-old. "Grandma Maggie, will you always be my grandmother, even if Mommy and Daddy don't want you to be?" The question revealed his deepest fear. That love could be revoked, that relationships could disappear based on other people's decisions. It was a fear that had been planted by his parents, manipulation and watered by years of uncertainty about his place in our family conflict. "I will always be your grandmother," I promised him, pulling him into a hug that I hoped would convey all the love and security I couldn't give him in words. No one can change that. "I will love you forever, no matter what happens between any of the adults in your life." That promise became the foundation of our relationship going forward. No matter how complicated the legal battles became, no matter how hostile Marcus and Sophia remained, I would be a constant presence in Tommy's life. I would be the adult who kept her word, who showed up consistently, who provided the emotional stability he needed to navigate his chaotic family situation. The months that followed brought new challenges as Marcus and Sophia escalated their attempts to undermine my relationship with Tommy. They enrolled him in activities that conflicted with our scheduled visits, claimed he was too sick to attend our planned outings, and began subjecting him to intensive questioning after each visit about what we talked about and what I said about them. Tommy started showing signs of stress related to these interrogations, developing headaches and stomach aches that seemed to correlate with our visit schedule. He became increasingly anxious about saying the wrong thing, or inadvertently betraying confidences that might get him or me in trouble. Linda, our supervisor, documented these changes and filed additional reports with the family court expressing concern about the parents' behavior. She recommended that the court address the interference with visitation and the inappropriate pressure being placed on the child to report on his relationship with his grandmother. The judge was not pleased with Marcus and Sophia's attempts to circumvent the court order. During a porgra hearing to address these violations, she made it clear that continued interference with my visitation rights would result in more serious consequences, potentially including a change in custody arrangements. This threat seemed to shock Marcus and Sophia into a temporary truce. The interrogations stopped, the scheduling conflicts mysteriously resolved, and Tommy's stress levels decreased noticeably. They were still hostile and unwelcoming, but they were no longer actively sabotaging our relationship. During this period of relative calm, I was able to focus on rebuilding the trust and intimacy that had been damaged by years of conflict. Tommy and I developed new traditions and shared interests that belonged only to us, creating positive memories that could sustain him through whatever difficulties lay ahead. We started taking nature walks in the park near my apartment, collecting interesting rocks and leaves that we would research together when we got home. We cooked simple meals that he could help prepare, teaching him basic life skills while creating opportunities for conversation and connection. Most importantly, we talked about his feelings and experiences without judgment or agenda. I became a safe space where he could express confusion, anger, sadness, or fear without worrying about protecting adult feelings or managing adult conflicts. One afternoon, as we worked on a jigsaw puzzle together, Tommy asked me something that revealed how much he had been processing our family situation. "Grandma Maggie, do you think my parents love me?" The question hit me like a physical blow because it revealed the depth of his insecurity about his most fundamental relationships. A child should never have to wonder whether his parents love him, should never have reason to doubt that he is wanted and valued. "Of course they love you," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults show love in ways that are confusing or don't feel very loving, but that doesn't mean the love isn't there." It was a diplomatic answer that honored his need to believe in his parents' love, while acknowledging his experience of their behavior as something less than nurturing. I couldn't destroy his faith in them without causing more psychological damage, but I also couldn't pretend that their treatment of him was healthy or appropriate. But why do they act like I'm in trouble all the time? Why do they get mad when I have fun with you? Those are very good questions, I told him. Sometimes when adults are unhappy about other things, they take those feelings out on the people around them, even when those people don't deserve it. That's not your fault, and it's not really about you. These conversations helped Tommy begin to separate his own worth from his parents' emotional states, to understand that their behavior was about their issues rather than his inadequacies. It was a crucial developmental step that would protect him from internalizing their dysfunction as his own failure. As Tommy's 10th birthday approached, I faced another decision about how to navigate the celebration. This time, Marcus and Sophia extended a grudging invitation for me to attend the official party, though their lawyer made it clear that this was being done to comply with the court order rather than from any genuine desire for my presence. I accepted the invitation because I knew it would mean something to Tommy to have me there, but I prepared myself for the kind of subtle hostility and exclusion I had experienced years earlier. I bought an age-appropriate gift that I knew he would love, prepared myself emotionally for whatever manipulation they might attempt, and arrived at their house with realistic expectations about the reception I would receive. The party was even more elaborate than the one where this whole conflict had begun. Professional decorators had transformed their backyard into a theme park, complete with hired entertainment and catered food that probably cost more than my monthly rent. It was impressive in its scale and execution, but it felt cold and performative, rather than joyful and authentic. Tommy's face lit up when he saw me arrive, and his genuine happiness at my presence was worth whatever discomfort I might experience during the event. He immediately ran to show me the various attractions and activities, proud to have his grandmother witness the spectacle that had been created for his celebration. But as the party progressed, I noticed that Tommy seemed more like a guest at his own event than the guest of honor. He was expected to be gracious and polite to all the adult attendees, many of whom seemed more interested in networking with his parents than celebrating his birthday. He was performing the role of the perfect child, rather than simply being allowed to enjoy his special day. Sophia maintained a facade of civility throughout the party, but her smiles never reached her eyes when she looked at me. She made sure to position herself prominently in any photos that included Tommy and me, as if she needed to mark her territory and demonstrate her authority over the situation. Marcus was even more distant than usual, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary and avoiding any meaningful interaction. It was clear that my presence was being tolerated rather than welcomed, that I was there on sufferance rather than as a valued family member. Despite the undercurrent of tension, Tommy seemed to enjoy having me at his party. He made sure I met his friends, included me in the activities when possible, and sought me out for hugs and conversation throughout the event. His loyalty and affection in the face of his parents' obvious displeasure showed a strength of character that gave me hope for his future. When it came time for gift opening, Tommy saved mine for last, as if he wanted to end the ceremony with something special. When he unwrapped the dinosaur encyclopedia I had chosen, his excitement was genuine and infectious. He immediately began flipping through the pages, pointing out his favorite creatures and sharing facts he already knew. Sophia's smile grew even more strained as she watched her son's enthusiastic reaction to my gift, which had clearly connected with his interests more effectively than many of the expensive toys he had received from other guests. Her comment when Tommy wasn't listening was predictably cutting. "How thoughtful of you to encourage his childish obsessions, instead of helping him develop more sophisticated interests." I didn't respond to her provocation, recognizing it as an attempt to create conflict that would justify excluding me from future events. Instead, I focused on Tommy's joy and ignored the toxic undercurrent that seemed to follow Sophia wherever she went. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Tommy pulled me aside for a private conversation. He wanted to thank me not just for the gift, but for being there, for making the effort to be part of his special day, despite the obvious tension it created. "I know it's hard for you to be here," he said, with an insight that seemed far beyond his 10 years. "But it means everything to me that you came anyway." His words reminded me once again why I had chosen to fight for my place in his life, why I had endured legal battles and family conflict, and personal attacks to maintain our relationship. This child needed to know that he had at least one adult who would show up for him consistently, who would put his needs above their own comfort. The party marked a turning point in our family dynamics, though not necessarily a positive one. While Marcus and Sophia had demonstrated that they could tolerate my presence when required by court order, they had also made it clear that I would never be truly welcome in their world. Over the following months, they developed more subtle ways of undermining my relationship with Tommy. They began scheduling family vacations and activities during my visitation weekends, forcing me to either miss time with him or appear unreasonable for objecting to their plans. They enrolled him in an expensive private school that required weekend commitments for sports and academic activities, creating legitimate conflicts with our scheduled visits. They began involving him in their social circle more heavily, exposing him to adults who shared their values and worldview, while subtly reinforcing the message that I was an outsider who didn't belong. Most insidiously, they began using financial incentives to compete with the emotional connection Tommy and I shared. Expensive gifts, exotic trips, and exclusive experiences became tools for demonstrating their superior ability to provide for him, implicitly contrasting their generosity with my more modest offerings. Tommy, to his credit, seemed to recognize these manipulations for what they were. He appreciated the material benefits his parents provided but never seemed to confuse luxury with love. Our simple activities continued to bring him joy, and he often expressed preference for our quiet time together over the elaborate experiences his parents orchestrated. But I could see the pressure wearing on him as he grew older, and more aware of the adult dynamics surrounding him. He was being forced to navigate competing loyalties and conflicting messages about worth and value. He was learning to compartmentalize his relationships, to be different versions of himself depending on which adults he was with. During one of our visits, when Tommy was 11, he asked me a question that revealed how much the constant tension was affecting him. "Grandma Maggie, do you think I'll ever have a normal family?" The sadness in his voice broke my heart, because it revealed his growing awareness that his family situation was different from his peers, that the conflict and manipulation he lived with wasn't typical or healthy. "I don't know what normal means, honey," I told him honestly. "Every family is different, and every family has its own challenges. But I think what makes a family healthy is when the people in it treat each other with love and respect, and when children feel safe and valued. Do you think I'm safe and valued?" He asked, and the fact that he needed to ask the question was answer enough. "I think you are incredibly loved," I said carefully. "And I think you are learning to be strong and kind, despite some very difficult circumstances. That takes courage, and I'm proud of you for that." These conversations helped Tommy develop resilience and self-awareness, but they also highlighted the unfairness of his situation. He was being forced to develop emotional maturity beyond his years, to cope with adult problems that should never have been his burden to carry. As we moved into the second phase of our court-ordered relationship, I began to focus more on preparing Tommy for the challenges he would face as he grew older. I wanted to give him tools for maintaining his sense of self, despite the manipulation and pressure he was experiencing at home. We talked about healthy relationships, about the difference between love and control, about the importance of trusting his own feelings and perceptions, even when others tried to convince him he was wrong. We discussed the value of education, the importance of financial independence, and the power of making choices based on his own values rather than other people's expectations. Most importantly, I tried to model the kind of adult relationship I hoped he would seek in his own life someday. I showed him what it looked like to love someone without trying to control them, to support someone without expecting anything in return, to maintain boundaries while still being generous with affection and attention. These lessons became even more crucial as Tommy entered adolescence and the conflicts within his family intensified. Marcus and Sophia's marriage was showing signs of strain, and their disagreements about money, parenting, and priorities were becoming more frequent and more public. Tommy began spending more time with me during this period, not because the court had ordered it, but because he needed refuge from the chaos at home. My apartment became a sanctuary where he could do homework in peace, express his emotions without judgment, and simply be a teenager without the pressure of managing adult conflicts. During one particularly difficult weekend, when his parents were in the middle of a major fight about financial decisions, Tommy broke down and told me he wished he could just live with me permanently. The pain in his voice revealed how much the constant tension was affecting his mental health and emotional development. I held him while he cried, my own heart breaking for this child who had been forced to grow up too fast in an environment where love was conditional and peace was rare. I wanted nothing more than to protect him from the dysfunction that surrounded him, but I also knew that removing him from his parents' care wasn't realistic or necessarily in his best interests. Instead, I focused on being the stable, consistent presence he needed to weather whatever storms lay ahead. I became his safe harbor, the place he could return to for unconditional love and acceptance no matter what chaos erupted in other areas of his life. As Tommy approached his 13th birthday, I realized that our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had expected when this journey began. I wasn't just his grandmother anymore. I was his mentor, his confidant, and his example of what healthy love looked like. The broke energy comment that had started our family's downward spiral seemed like ancient history now, a petty insult that had ultimately led to something much more meaningful than the superficial relationships I had once desperately tried to maintain. I had lost a son and daughter-in-law, but I had gained something more valuable. An authentic relationship with my grandson built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and manipulation. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable dysfunction, even when that refusal comes at a personal cost. The scholarship fund I had established continued to grow and help deserving students, creating a legacy that would outlast any family drama. The young people who benefited from those scholarships sent me updates and thank you notes that filled my mailbox with gratitude and hope, reminding me that love and generosity could create positive change in the world. But the greatest reward was watching Tommy develop into a thoughtful, compassionate young man despite the challenges he faced at home. He was learning to think for himself, to question authority when it conflicted with his values, and to maintain his integrity even under pressure. Our relationship had taught him that love didn't require sacrifice of self-respect, that family bonds were strengthened by honesty rather than weakened by it, and that sometimes the greatest act of love was refusing to enable harmful behavior. As I watched him grow and mature, I knew that the painful decision I had made years earlier to change my will and demand basic respect had ultimately been the right choice, not because it had brought me vindication or revenge, but because it had created space for something better to emerge from the ashes of what had been lost. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning when Tommy was 15. It was Marcus, and his voice carried a desperation I hadn't heard since he was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "Mom, we need to talk. Something's happened." For a moment, I felt the old, familiar pull of maternal instinct, the urge to drop everything and rush to fix whatever crisis had befallen my son. But 5 years of boundaries and hard-won self-respect held me steady. "What's wrong, Marcus?" Sophia left. She took half of everything and disappeared to her mother's place in Connecticut. She's filing for divorce and demanding full custody of Tommy. She's claiming I'm an unfit parent because I allowed you back into his life. The irony was staggering. The woman who had started this entire conflict with her cruel comment about broke energy was now using my relationship with Tommy as ammunition in her own battle for financial advantage. She was weaponizing the very court-ordered visitation she had fought against, twisting it into evidence of Marcus's poor judgment. "Where's Tommy now?" I asked, cutting through his self-pity to focus on what actually mattered. "He's with me, but he's devastated. He blames himself for their marriage falling apart. He thinks if he hadn't wanted to see you so much, maybe Sophia wouldn't have left." My heart ached for my grandson, who was once again being forced to carry adult guilt that didn't belong to him. At 15, he was old enough to understand the complexity of divorce, but still young enough to believe he could have prevented it through different choices. "I'll be right there," I said, surprising myself with the automatic response. Then I caught myself. "Actually, no. Tommy can come here if he wants to talk, but I'm not coming to your house to clean up another mess you and Sophia created." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if Marcus had hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with something that might have been tears. "I've lost everything, Mom. my marriage, probably half my assets, maybe even my son. And the worst part is that I know it's my fault. It was the first time in decades that Marcus had acknowledged responsibility for any of the consequences of his choices. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to offer the unconditional maternal support I had always provided in the past. But I had learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and codependency. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said honestly. "But these are consequences of choices you and Sophia made. The way you treated me, the way you raised Tommy to believe that love comes with conditions, the way you prioritized appearance over authenticity. Actions have results, Marcus. Can Tommy come stay with you for a while?" he asked, his voice small and defeated. "Just until I figure out what's happening with the custody situation. He's asking for you, and I don't know what else to do." "Of course," I said immediately. "He can stay as long as he needs to." Tommy arrived that evening with a single backpack and eyes red from crying. At 15, he was nearly as tall as his father, but in that moment he looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was sad. He collapsed onto my couch and finally let himself fall apart completely. I held him while he sobbed, his body shaking with the force of emotions he had been holding back for too long. All the years of walking on eggshells, of trying to keep everyone happy, of feeling responsible for adult problems, had finally caught up with him. "It's all my fault," he choked out between sobs. "If I hadn't wanted to see you, if I hadn't caused all those problems with the court and the visitation, maybe they would still be together." "Oh, sweetheart, no." I stroked his hair, my own eyes filling with tears at his pain. "Their marriage problems had nothing to do with you. Adults get divorced because they can't solve their own issues, not because of anything their children do or don't do. But she said I was disloyal for loving you. She said I was choosing you over her, and that's why she couldn't trust our family anymore." The depth of Sophia's manipulation was breathtaking. She had managed to convince a 15-year-old boy that his love for his grandmother was a betrayal that had destroyed his parents' marriage. She had taken his most innocent emotion and turned it into a weapon of guilt and self-blame. "Tommy, listen to me carefully. Your love for me is not disloyal. Your parents' inability to handle your relationship with me is their problem, not yours. A child should never have to choose between loving different members of their family." Over the next few days, as Tommy settled into my guest room and tried to process the upheaval in his life, more details about Marcus and Sophia's marriage emerged. They had been living beyond their means for years, using credit and loans to maintain their lavish lifestyle. The financial pressure had created constant tension, which they had dealt with by blaming external factors rather than examining their own choices. My change of will, my refusal to continue funding their excess, had forced them to confront the reality of their spending habits. Without my financial safety net, they had been forced to take out loans against their house, to max out credit cards, to make increasingly desperate choices to maintain their image. The stress had revealed the fundamental incompatibility between them. Marcus, for all his faults, had retained some memory of his humble beginnings and was willing to consider downsizing their lifestyle. Sophia, however, viewed any reduction in luxury as a personal failure and blamed Marcus for not earning enough to support her expectations. The final blow had come when Sophia discovered that Marcus had secretly taken out a second mortgage on their house to cover their debts without telling her. The betrayal of trust, combined with the financial insecurity, had shattered whatever remained of their relationship. Now she was positioning herself as the wronged party, claiming that Marcus's financial irresponsibility and his inability to manage his relationship with me had created an unstable environment for Tommy. She was seeking full custody along with substantial alimony and child support that would allow her to maintain her lifestyle without the inconvenience of actually living with Marcus. The custody battle that followed was vicious and expensive, exactly the kind of conflict that damages children regardless of who ultimately wins. Sophia hired aggressive attorneys who painted Marcus as an unfit father influenced by a vindictive mother. They claimed that my presence in Tommy's life was evidence of poor judgment, and that the court-ordered visitation had created family instability. Marcus's lawyers countered by documenting Sophia's emotional manipulation of Tommy and her attempts to use him as a weapon against both his father and his grandmother. They argued that she was the one creating instability by trying to cut Tommy off from his extended family for her own financial gain. Throughout this legal circus, Tommy lived with me and tried to maintain some semblance of normal teenage life. He enrolled in the local high school, made new friends, and slowly began to heal from years of emotional turmoil. Away from the constant tension of his parents' household, his natural personality began to emerge more fully. He was funny and thoughtful, creative and compassionate. He had inherited Marcus's intelligence but combined it with an emotional awareness that his father had never developed. He was learning to trust his own perceptions and feelings instead of constantly second-guessing himself to avoid conflict. The court-appointed counselor who evaluated the family situation recognized what I had known all along. Tommy was thriving in my care. He was attending school regularly, participating in activities, and showing none of the anxiety and stress symptoms that had plagued him while living with his parents, dysfunction. After 6 months of legal wrangling, the judge awarded joint custody with Tommy's primary residence being with Marcus, but with expanded time at my house, and the explicit right for him to choose where he wanted to spend time as he got older. Sophia received significant financial support, but not the complete victory she had been seeking. More importantly, the judge recognized my role as a stabilizing influence in Tommy's life, and formalized my status as his legal guardian in case anything happened to Marcus. It was validation that my fight for our relationship had been worthwhile, that my refusal to enable dysfunction had ultimately benefited the person who mattered most. Tommy chose to stay with me full-time during his junior year of high school, visiting his father on weekends and holidays but making my apartment his primary home. He said he needed the peace and stability to focus on his college preparations and his own emotional healing. During this time, we developed an even deeper relationship built on mutual respect and genuine friendship. He confided in me about his dreams and fears, his romantic interests, and academic challenges. I provided guidance when asked, but mostly just listened, giving him the space to figure out who he was becoming. The scholarship recipients from my foundation had become extended family to both of us. Tommy volunteered at the community college, tutoring younger students and helping with scholarship applications. He saw firsthand how education could transform lives and began to understand the value of the legacy I had chosen over leaving money to people who already had more than they needed. On his 18th birthday, Tommy made an announcement that surprised everyone except me. He had been accepted to several prestigious universities but had chosen to attend the community college where my scholarship fund was housed. He wanted to start his education there, to be part of the community that had become so important to both of us. Marcus was horrified, seeing it as a step backward from the elite education he had always envisioned for his son. But Tommy was firm in his decision. He had learned that value wasn't determined by prestige or price tags, that wisdom could be found in unexpected places, and that his own path might look different from his parents' expectations. At the scholarship ceremony that year, Tommy spoke about what it meant to be part of a community that valued character over connections, potential over pedigree. He talked about his grandmother, who had taught him that true wealth came from relationships built on respect and genuine care for others. Watching him speak, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with witnessing the emergence of a young man who understood what really mattered in life. He had learned lessons that his father had never mastered, had developed wisdom that came from experiencing both privilege and struggle. After 2 years at the community college, Tommy transferred to a 4-year university with a full scholarship earned through his academic achievements and community service. But he remained connected to the scholarship program, serving on the selection committee and mentoring new recipients. Marcus and I maintained a cordial but distant relationship focused entirely on our shared love for Tommy. He never apologized for the years of disrespect and financial manipulation, but he also never tried to justify them anymore. We existed in a space of mutual tolerance, based on our common investment in Tommy's well-being. Sophia remarried within 2 years of her divorce, choosing a wealthy older man who could provide the lifestyle she felt she deserved. She maintained minimal contact with Tommy, sending expensive gifts on his birthday and holidays, but showing little interest in his actual life or achievements. Tommy seemed relieved rather than hurt by her emotional absence. He had learned that love couldn't be purchased or performed, that relationships required genuine care and commitment that Sophia had never been capable of providing. On my 75th birthday, Tommy presented me with a gift that brought tears to my eyes. He had created a photo album documenting our relationship from his early childhood through his college years, with written reflections on what each memory meant to him. The final page contained a letter that summarized everything our journey together had taught both of us. He wrote about learning that love requires boundaries, that respect cannot be demanded but must be earned, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. He thanked me for showing him what unconditional love looked like, not the enabling kind that ignores harmful behavior, but the authentic kind that sees people clearly and loves them anyway while refusing to be destroyed by their dysfunction. The letter ended with a promise that meant more to me than any inheritance could have. I will carry forward the lessons you taught me about dignity and self-respect, and I will make sure that any children I have someday understand the difference between love and obligation, between family and dysfunction. Looking back on the journey that began with Sophia's cruel comment about broke energy, I realized that her words had been a gift in disguise. They had forced me to examine relationships I had accepted without question, to demand the respect I deserved, and to what I can model healthy boundaries for a grandson who desperately needed to see what authentic love looked like. The money I had redirected from Marcus to the scholarship fund had helped dozens of young people achieve their educational dreams. But more importantly, it had taught Tommy that resources should be used to lift others up rather than maintain artificial hierarchies, that legacy is measured in positive impact rather than accumulated wealth. At 75, I was living alone by choice rather than circumstance, surrounded by relationships based on mutual affection rather than obligation or manipulation. Tommy visited regularly, not because he felt guilty or needed something from me, but because he genuinely enjoyed my company and valued our connection. The scholarship recipients stayed in touch, sending updates about their careers and families, their achievements and challenges. They had become the extended family I had always wanted, people who understood gratitude and reciprocity, who knew how to love without keeping score. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had continued to enable Marcus and Sophia's dysfunction, if I had kept apologizing for taking up space in their perfect world. Tommy would have grown up believing that love meant accepting disrespect, that family obligations flowed only in one direction, that his worth was determined by his usefulness to others. Instead, he had learned that relationships required mutual respect, that boundaries were acts of love rather than rejection, and that sometimes the most generous thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. The broke energy that Sophia had accused me of giving turned out to be the most valuable gift I could offer. It taught Tommy to see past surface appearances to underlying character, to value substance over style, and to understand that true wealth couldn't be bought or inherited but had to be earned through integrity and compassion. As I sat in my living room that evening, surrounded by photos of scholarship recipients and letters from grateful students, I felt a contentment that had nothing to do with vindication or revenge, and everything to do with knowing that I had used my resources and my influence to create positive change in the world. The family I had lost through my refusal to accept disrespect had been replaced by something better. A chosen family of people who understood the value of education, the importance of gratitude, and the power of love expressed through action rather than obligation. Tommy called that night, as he did every evening, to check in and share the details of his day. He was thriving in his junior year, double majoring in social work and business, with plans to expand scholarship programs for first-generation college students. As we talked, I realized that the greatest legacy I could leave wasn't money or property, but the example of someone who had learned to value herself enough to demand basic respect, who had chosen authentic relationships over convenient ones, and who had used her resources to create opportunities for others, rather than funding the lifestyle of people who took generosity for granted. The broke energy comment that had once stung so deeply now seemed like the catalyst for the best decision I had ever made. It had forced me to examine what really mattered, to choose dignity over family obligation, and to create a legacy based on character rather than compliance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.